Hello! We are Group 3, and we made a thesaurus of terms from the book series A Song of Ice and Fire. This series has become more commonly known as Game of Thrones since HBO's TV show became popular. What is A Song of Ice and Fire? A Song of Ice and Fire is a very long, very detailed, but very excellent fantasy book series. There are 5 books published so far, with 2 more forthcoming. There is also an HBO television adaptation and several spin-off books. For example, The World of Ice and Fire is an encyclopedia-type book of the history of the world and the story, and several novellas have been published that take place before the main series of books. The users for our thesaurus consists of superfans, regular fans, and a general audience of people just stepping into the series. A good example of our user base is the subreddit for this series. There are Game of Thrones scholars, or superfans, who write elaborate in-depth essays about every subject you can think of. There are normal fans who have casually read the books or watched the show, and there are people who are just starting out. This website is called Wars and Politics of Ice and Fire, and it is an example of essays written by Game of Thrones superfans. As you can see, there is a lot of meat to dig into in this book series. This is an example of some of the more popular posts on Reddit. Characters and gods seem to take up a lot of interest. So if someone were to catalog these essays, Reddit posts, or blog posts, hopefully our thesaurus would help them to use consistent vocabulary. Domain analysis. For our domain, we decided to look only at the main series of published books. We did not take terms from the spin-off books or the television show. We consulted several websites to get an idea of how terms were organized and what we should be looking at. Additionally, since A Song of Ice and Fire is truly a story of epic proportions, we restricted ourselves to terms that applied only to the continent of Westeros. The world in the books has at least 3 continents, and by keeping ourselves on the main continent of Westeros, it helped us to keep our terms under more control. Here you can see some of the categories from the Ice and Fire wiki, which helped give us an example of how terms can be organized. Term extraction. A thesaurus for A Song of Ice and Fire could easily be filled with thousands of terms. Since we were limited to about 100, we decided to each choose categories that we would focus on and go from there. Chelsea focused on the major houses and locations in Westeros, Maggie worked on the 3 main religions in Westeros, Haley worked on magic, and Heather focused on creatures. We ended up with about 300 candidates for terms. Each of us entered our terms into a Google document with whatever notes we felt would be useful at that stage. Facet analysis. Here we looked at our terms as a whole and deleted many that didn't fit. Some terms were duplicates that we could merge, and we also moved some terms around to different categories. We used Aitchison's fundamental facets to organize our terms. This is our very first draft of our facet analysis. And this is our second draft as we started to get a little bit more organized. Relationship analysis. A lot of us had already added relationships when we first started adding terms to the document. We used related terms, broader and narrower terms, and use for terms to create relationships. Many terms couldn't be connected to anything, so we deleted them. We also began adding scope notes at this stage. Here are some examples of our terms as they started to get fleshed out. Final term selection. At this stage, we began to create consistency with how our terms appeared. We used qualifiers for homographs, scope notes for terms that needed to be distinguished from real-world usage of the term, and we avoided using initial articles unless the article helped to clarify the meaning of the term. All of our nouns and noun phrases were checked to be sure that they represented single concepts. We used lowercase letters unless the terms had proper nouns, and we employed letter-by-letter alphabetization instead of word-by-word. We also finalized our classification index and added notations. Here you can see our finalized classified index and our finalized alphabetical index with notations. We ended up with 139 terms, with an additional 38 non-preferred terms. Our experience was a complicated one. Despite starting on this project weeks in advance, somehow we were still working on it up until the due date. We probably should have planned ahead better because at times it seemed that we were doing the same tasks over and over again when we didn't set things up right initially. This was especially clear when we tried to create a notation scheme. We went through several notation schemes before finding one that worked best for us. Term deletion was also difficult for us. It was hard to narrow down our 300 terms to less than half of that. But overall, this was a great learning experience, and this hands-on adventure allowed us to learn from our mistakes. Thanks for listening.